Hello, welcome to this press conference with Canada's NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, and Lisa Roberts, NDP candidate for Halifax. After opening remarks, we'll be taking one question and one follow-up. Please use the raise hand function on Zoom. Bonjour, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse avec Jagmeet Singh et Lisa Roberts, candidate du NPD pour Halifax. Nous allons prendre une question et un suivi. Veuillez utiliser la fonction lever la main de Zoom. Okay, over to you, Jagmeet.
For Halifax. I'd like to start by acknowledging that I am and Jagmeet and I are standing here in Kjipuktuk in Mi'kmaq, the unceded and ancestral home of the Mi'kmaq. I'm running in the next election because I see how long waits for healthcare are hurting people, how the climate crisis is impacting our communities, and how the price of homes is crushing people's ability to build and even to dream of a good life for themselves. I've knocked on hundreds of doors this summer, and I've met with seniors who fear being forced out of their apartments where they've lived and built community for decades. I've chatted with young families who feel like their dream of owning a home is getting further away. I choose to be on Team Jagmeet in this election, not only because he sees and cares about what people are going through, but because he's here with solutions. Jagmeet inspires us to believe that we can change things, to finally put people first. It's my great pleasure to introduce the leader of Canada's NDP, Jagmeet Singh.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Well, we're so honored to have Lisa Roberts as our candidate here in Halifax. And the people of Halifax will be so well served to have someone like Lisa fighting for them in Ottawa to make sure Ottawa works for them. Before I get into my remarks, I want to just talk about the recent notice of lockout for CP rail workers and for CN rail workers. I want to send a clear message to Justin Trudeau and the Liberals. We will oppose any attempt of the federal government to intervene on behalf of the employer against the workers in what should be a negotiated agreement between the workers and the employer for good wages and safe work conditions. For too long, we have seen Liberals and Conservatives interfere in these type of labor disputes to the advantage of the employer, to the detriment of the worker. That is wrong, and we will oppose that. We know that Liberals have done it and Conservatives have done it. You Democrats will always stand on the side of working people to get a fair deal for good wages and for safe work conditions, and that will remain our principled position. Today, I want to talk about something that I think a lot of us grew up believing, that if you worked hard, you could find a place to call home. You could buy groceries and put food on the table for your family. You could save up for a rainy day and maybe take your family on a trip. You could buy those special treats for your loved one. But that is not how things are today. Sadly, people are so squeezed, they can barely keep their head above water. And I have a message. I want to make it very clear. This is not your fault. This is a result of a rigged system, rigged by Liberals and Conservatives to allow corporate landlords to rip you off, to rent evict you, to jack up rents, to put in place fixed lease terms that, again, rip off tenants, rip off people. This is a rigged system. And Justin Trudeau has had 9 years to fix this problem. He hasn't fixed it. Things have gotten worse. In fact, they've gotten so worse that rents have gone up by $1,600 here in Halifax. In fact, for the people that are struggling right now and not able to find a home, that are struggling with homelessness, more than 1 out of 5 of those folks are on the streets as a result of either rent evictions or fixed term leases. It's directly a result of those policies. And what would Pierre Poilievre do? Well, Pierre Poilievre wants even less rules, wants to let his corporate buddies rip you off even more, less protections for you, more power for his corporate buddies. And why is that? Well, it's because those are his buddies. His chief strategist owns a company that is a major lobbyist for a large corporate landlord. His governing body for the Conservative Party is made up of lobbyists, many of those real estate lobbyists. And again and again, we see that his big donors are, again, corporate lobbyists. So he has no interest in changing a system that makes his buddies lots of money. The current system makes rich developers, corporate landlords, lots of money. but it does not work for people. So we want to change that. Our plan is let's change the rules so they put people ahead for once. We can change the rules to ban rent evictions. We can ensure that we ban fixed term leases. We can change the rules and tip the scales to advantage everyday folks, to tip the scales to advantage people. That's our vision. That's our plan. I'll do that again in French and then I look forward to your questions. D'abord, je veux commencer en parlant de la situation avec les travailleurs de CP Rail et de CN Rail. La situation, c'est il y a un avis qu'on va avoir un lockout. Donc, j'ai un message pour Justin Trudeau et pour les libéraux. On ne va pas accepter aucune ingérence du part du gouvernement fédéral dans les négociations entre les travailleurs et les grandes entreprises. Trop souvent, on a vu les libéraux et les conservateurs ingèrent dans ces dossiers et ça favorise les grandes entreprises et ça nuit aux efforts des travailleurs d'avoir des bons salaires et des conditions sécuritaires au travail. Donc, on va s'opposer aucune action pour ingérer dans ces dossiers. On va dire que le gouvernement doit laisser les travailleurs négocier en bonne foi des matières, des conditions de travail et des salaires. Et on a vu depuis le début de cette situation que les employeurs ne travaillent pas en bonne foi. Ça, c'est le problème. Donc, on veut voir des négociations qui sont libres et sans l'ingérence du gouvernement fédéral. Aussi, aujourd'hui, je vais parler de la situation en général, le coût de la vie. Je sais que plusieurs personnes ont pensé que si on travaille fort, on peut trouver du logement abordable, on peut faire l'épicerie, on peut économiser l'argent, on peut peut-être prendre des vacances, acheter des trucs spéciaux pour nos proches. Mais ce n'est pas le cas maintenant. À cause de l'augmentation du coût de la vie, c'est pire que jamais et c'est impossible d'économiser. Les gens ont de la difficulté à seulement rejoindre les deux bouts. Et je veux dire que ce n'est pas votre faute, c'est causé par un système truqué par les libéraux et les conservateurs pour avantager les grandes entreprises. Spécifiquement, si je parle du logement, les grandes entreprises peuvent rénover les gens, peuvent augmenter les loyers, peuvent avoir un bail à terme fixe. Ce sont des outils qui donnent un avantage aux grandes entreprises, mais qui font mal aux gens. Et Justin Trudeau a eu 9 ans pour régler tout ça. Il a laissé les entreprises de continuer d'exploiter les gens. La rénovation continue. La situation est pire que jamais. Le coût de loyer a augmenté 1 600 $ ici à Halifax. Aussi, avec les conservateurs, on sait que Pierre Poilievre veut laisser ces grandes entreprises de continuer cette exploitation. Il veut réduire les lois, les règles pour protéger les gens et donner plus de pouvoir aux ces grandes entreprises, donc, ce qui fait encore mal aux gens. Et ce n'est pas surprenant parce que tous ses amis sont des lobbyistes pour les grandes entreprises, des propriétaires de ces immeubles, donc il veut continuer d'aider ses amis. Nous, les néo-démocrates, on veut changer les règles pour prioriser monsieur, madame, tout le monde, pour aider les gens. On veut bannir les rénovations, bannir les termes fixes des bails. Et on peut faire ça. On peut changer les règles pour prioriser les gens. C'est exactement ce qu'on va faire. Merci. And with that, I'm ready for any questions you might have.
Okay, we're going to start with questions on site. We have Ben with All Nova Scotia. Yeah, and just wondering if you could speak a bit about the specific ways that you're going to protect renters, that your party, you know, if it forms government in the next federal election, plans to protect renters, as the sign here says today.
Yeah, so there's lots of ways we can do it. One concrete example is the federal government gives insurance, CMHC, so government-backed insurance to large corporate landlords, gives them a special tax treatment, gives them direct financial assistance. We're saying not a cent of that money will go to a company that rips off renters. Not a cent of that public money will go to someone that renovates. And we know that these companies, these corporate landlords, take federal support and then go out and renovate or go out and jack up rents or bring in fixed term leases. That's one concrete thing. The other thing is, in general, there's lots of excuses. If a federal leader wants to find an excuse, he can find an excuse with jurisdiction. But I believe leaders don't look for excuses, they look for solutions. And some of the solutions are we could leverage the federal resources that we have, the agreements we have with provinces and municipalities, leverage those agreements to say you need to ban rent evictions, you need to ban fixed term leases, and we will work with provinces and municipalities to make that happen. But we really need to get serious about changing the rules that have been set up for so long to rip off renters, to rip off people. We've got to protect people, and that's what we're proposing to do.
Do you have a follow-up? Yeah, on the topic of housing and homelessness as well, one potential solution that's been suggested by fellow MP Andy Fillmore is to convert some of the Canada Post lands here in Halifax into housing for those who can't afford housing. I don't know if you've spoken much on that specific suggestion, but would you care to share your opinion on that suggestion?
I believe we should be using every piece of federal land that is available to develop affordable homes. My concern with the Liberals, they have started using some federal land, but the majority of what's being built on that federal land, so land owned by the public, owned by all of us, is not affordable. They're using federal land to build market housing, which is not going to help someone who can't afford. Even some of the good job can't afford what the going rate is for a condo or a house right now. So we need that federal land, whether it's Canada Post land or any other federal land in cities across our country. Every square meter of federal land should be used for strictly affordable housing. And I'm talking about affordable housing. I mean, people should be able to pay their rent and have money left over to buy their groceries, to pay their bills, to save up. Not the situation where we see people are spending over half of their income on their homes. That's not affordable. So we should build on federal land, absolutely, but we need to have strict guarantees that we're building affordable homes on that land. That's something that neither Justin Trudeau has talked about, and frankly, Pierre Poilievre talks about building, but he doesn't talk about building affordable. So he's talking about helping out his rich developers. Every time you hear him talk, he's talking about building for rich developers and rich investors, not for people. We're talking about building for people, affordable homes. Lisa's going to add a couple of comments on this as well.
Thank you. Just specifically on the Canada Post site at Almond Street, that is relatively close to Windsor Park, which is a federal DND site where multiple former private members' quarters, which are 100% occupied right now, have been torn down under this government. There's lots of federal land available, which isn't currently providing good jobs in our community, where frankly, building could start tomorrow. We also have the Shannon Park site, which has sat undeveloped during this entire Trudeau government, while the housing crisis, which is really a product of the rules as they have been, has just gotten more and more acute. So I think there are many opportunities that have shorter timelines and which would be more easily pursued in partnership with non-market housing providers and federal crown corporations and other agencies directly under the control of the federal government.
That's great.
Now we will take questions on Zoom. First, we'll start with Valerie Gamache from Radio Canada.
Bonjour, Monsieur Singh, vous allez bien?
Oui, merci.
J'aimerais vous entendre sur le débat sur l'avenir du caribou forestier. Je me demandais, dans ce dossier-là, est-ce que vous vous positionnez derrière la protection des emplois du secteur forestier ou derrière la protection de l'habitat des caribous?
Comme une partie des travailleurs, on veut faire les deux parce qu'on croit profondément on doit protéger l'environnement. En même temps, on doit protéger les travailleurs. Mais personne ne croit pas que Pierre Poilievre et les conservateurs qui ne s'occupent pas de l'environnement ne croient pas qu'il y a une crise de climat, de changement climatique. Ils ne croient pas qu'il y a un problème, pas du tout. On ne croit pas que Pierre Poilievre et les conservateurs veulent régler ça, veulent avoir un équilibre. Mais nous avons le crédit, nous avons une position claire parce qu'on veut défendre l'environnement, en même temps on veut protéger les travailleurs. On peut faire les deux. Mais on doit avoir une partie avec un bilan qui montre, oui, on croit dans l'importance de les deux. Les conservateurs ne peuvent pas le faire et les libéraux ont eu la chance et ils n'ont pas agi.
Est-ce que vous considérez donc la position libérale d'y aller avec un décret comme ça, imposer un décret à Québec comme un petit peu trop radical?
Je pense qu'on doit trouver un équilibre. Ça, c'est ma position, que on peut et on doit protéger l'environnement et l'habitat. C'est clair, pour le caribou, c'est essentiel. Pour la communauté autochtone, pour notre environnement, c'est essentiel. En même temps, il y a une façon de aussi protéger les travailleurs. Donc, on doit poursuivre comment on peut faire les deux. Et la raison pour laquelle je souligne notre bilan comme un parti qui veut défendre les travailleurs et aussi on reconnaît l'importance de protéger l'environnement. Ça, c'est quelque chose qui donne de la preuve qu'on est prêt de prendre ce dossier au sérieux. Les conservateurs n'ont pas ce même bilan. Et ils ont rejeté le fait qu'on a une crise climatique. Ils n'ont pas montré de crédibilité pour défendre l'environnement. Donc, on ne peut pas croire les conservateurs. Et les libéraux, ils ont eu leur chance. Ça, c'est pourquoi j'ai dit que nous avons la crédibilité et la volonté de protéger l'environnement et aussi protéger les emplois.
Next, we have Brian Tumulty from the National Post.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Singh. I heard your comments on the rail strike off the top, but I just wanted to ask, I mean, given the economic impacts of a strike like this, is there any sort of federal intervention that you would find acceptable?
First of all, these are very important workers. Their work is very important as well. I would say the only appropriate federal intervention is to force the employer to get back to the table and negotiate fairly with the workers. That's not something we see from the federal government. They often tip the scales against workers in favor of the employers, and that is absolutely wrong. The federal government should be there to defend workers, should not be tipping the scales for big bosses again and again, to the point that they know that they're just going to come in and tip the scales and workers aren't going to be able to get a fair deal. That is wrong. We're only in this position because both companies have failed to negotiate fairly with workers. In fact, have not shown good faith. If they negotiated in good faith, we would have a fair deal that gives good wages and safety for the workers, which means safety for citizens. We know that rail safety is a very serious question. We've seen the impacts when we don't consider rail safety. If we don't take that seriously, the impacts are very devastating. So this is important for the workers. This is important for Canada to get this right. Fair wages and safety for the workers.
And in the event that the government decides to bring in either back to work legislation or binding arbitration, would that impact the supply and confidence agreement?
Well, we've made it very clear that we would oppose both of those. We oppose those vehemently. The government should not be tipping the scales in favor of the big bosses again by signaling any sort of intervention that favors the big bosses, in this case, the employers in this case. That's wrong. We would oppose that every step of the way.
Next, we have Evan Dyer from the CBC.
Hi there. I heard your opening comments about the potential rail strike, but I'm just wondering, you've been talking about affordability and, one of the issues there is the price of groceries and so on. And any kind of a major interruption of rail delivery would cause those things to spike. Do you not have concerns about the effect that a strike by fairly well-paid workers at places like CN and CP would have on low-income Canadians who have to buy groceries?
I would not be pitting workers against each other. This is about a big boss that's making massive profits, that's not treating the workers fairly, and are not negotiating in good faith. If they negotiated in good faith, if CP Rail and CN Rail negotiated in good faith, there would be a settlement. And the settlement's about making sure workers get paid a decent wage that keeps up with the cost of living, something I frankly think every worker should get, as well as keeping the workers safe, because keeping workers safe directly impacts overall safety of the rail system. And that is something that we've seen under the Conservatives. When we erode rail safety, there are serious disasters, and that cannot happen again. So this is really about the CN Rail and CP Rail, big profitable corporations trying to exploit workers, and we should stop that from happening. There should be a fair settlement negotiated, and the federal government should not be intervening to tip the scales towards these big companies again. That is wrong, and we will oppose that.
And
actually, just one second piece. Our big concern around the cost of groceries is that big corporations are ripping off Canadians again in that area. We saw the bread price fixing where they made billions of dollars, it turns out, ripping off Canadians. And the biggest fine that they were awarded, or the biggest fine against them for one of the major players, was only $50 million for Canada Bread Company. So how is that going to deter them from doing it again? That's what I mean when I talk about the rules that are rigged against people and in favor of these large corporations, when they have very little jeopardy they're facing and they can make massive profits ripping off people and breaking the law. What's to stop them from doing it again? They already did it. That's what I'm saying. We got to change the rules to protect people from being exploited and gouged by these corporations that have already done so. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about affordability.
And I heard you say you don't want the federal government to put its finger on the scales on the side of the employer, but why would sending this dispute to binding arbitration, for example, be taking the side of the employer? Wouldn't that simply be putting it into a venue where it can be decided independently and fairly?
Well, it takes away the right to negotiate. And fundamentally, the right to negotiate is about fairness, in fact, for both parties. And workers, in all cases, would rather negotiate fairly at the table rather than be forced to go into binding arbitration, which could go either way. Depending on the arbitrariness of the arbitrator, it could be something that hurts the workers. It could favor the employer. We don't know. What is more fair is to negotiate at the table. And binding arbitration is something that the employers want to see happen. For some reason, it must benefit them. And so what we want in all cases is workers to be able to negotiate their settlements, their agreements in a fair way. That is the fundamental principle of a collective agreement. That is what New Democrats believe in. It is clear from example of again and again that neither the Liberals and Justin Trudeau nor Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives care in the same way about having fair negotiated settlements and agreements. That's the difference between us and them.
Next, we have Mickey Durjic from the Canadian Press.
Thanks. On the same topic, so I guess, would the NDP ever support back to work legislation for this potential work stoppage?
No.
And then, I guess, why not?
I think it's wrong. I think there's many other solutions. You got to work on forcing the employers to negotiate fairly. Again, this is an example of two highly profitable companies that want to take advantage of the workers. That's wrong. They should negotiate fairly in good faith and come to settlements. We believe in that. That is our principle. We will always find ways to encourage fair, settled agreements, negotiated agreements. That is who we are as a party. That's our belief, and we'll continue to support that every step of the way. You'll see Liberals waver on this. You'll see Conservatives jump to the help of big corporations to rip off Canadians. That's not us. We believe that workers should be always kept first. There's already too many disadvantages that workers experience. And so we want to always defend the right for working people to get a fair deal when it comes to getting a fair deal with their employer.
Seeing no other questions, I'll send it back to you, Jagmeet.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Thanks for everybody for being here. Really honored to be able to stand with our candidate, Lisa Roberts, candidate for Halifax, and your next MP for Halifax. Thanks so much. Merci.